Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the refurbishment meeting for Camelford Walk, Camelford Court, Clarendon, and Talbot Walk. My name is Bimi Shakuni. I'm the refurbishment design and delivery project manager at the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. I'll be chairing this meeting this evening. I would like to thank you all for coming. Next slide, please. I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to the Lancaster West team working on the external refurbishment of your blocks, and that's the outside of the buildings themselves, the communal spaces, the lower ground and or basement levels and landscaping. Many of you will have met James Caspel, our neighborhood director, and here today we've got Andrew Sluizer, who is the head of refurbishment design and delivery, Alfie Pickard, refurbishment design and delivery project officer, Janet Hall, our heat network engagement manager. You'll probably hear from most of us before the end of the evening. I will now hand over to Sanand, who will introduce the Pranay Prasad team. Sanand Prasad.
Classic, starting off with a mute. Elementary error. Sorry about that. Very great to be here talking to everyone from Camelford, Clarendon, Talbot, and oh, my brain's gone. Camelford Court. So my name is Sunand Prasad. I'm the project principal and design champion here. I'm founder of Pranay Prasad, who with our colleagues are doing the refurbishment design in collaboration with you all. And I'm just going to let all my team introduce themselves one by one. We wish we could be here in person with you, but this is second best and let's make the most of it. So over to Annalisa.
Hello everyone, I'm Annalisa. I'm an associate at Pranay Prasad and I'm project lead for the project. It's really nice to meet you all tonight. I'll hand over to Emily.
So, hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm the project architect looking after the blocks we were living in. Hand over to Simon.
Simon, are you on mute?
Dear me, that's very poor. Getting better at this. So, I'm meant to be the technical lead. I'm technical lead apart from ability with Zoom. Anyway, I'm supporting Emily and Annalisa on the project.
And hello, I'm Harriet Francis, an architect working on the project and also passive house designer. I can hand over to David.
Hello, I'm David Boscawen, fire consultant on the project, and our team at Trigon Fire Engineering will be working with you for looking at the fire strategy. Francis is with me here today, but we'll pass on to Mark.
Nearly got the best from me there with the mutes. Good evening all. My name's Mark Allen. I'm a chartered health and safety practitioner. I'm an associate consultant at a company called D-Risk. We're appointed across all lots as the CDM principal designer, which means we're responsible for planning, monitoring and managing health and safety at the pre-construction stage. And what that means is we review the architect's proposals to ensure that any materials that they're proposing are appropriately tested, particularly with regards to fire. We also assist in planning the actual construction work, so how we're actually going to deliver what you guys are going to choose. And we also review and propose contractors to ensure that only contractors with good health and safety record are actually allowed to work on your buildings. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Annalisa, is that all from your team? That's it. Okay. Great. So I'm just going to run through the agenda. The meeting will last an hour and a half and will run as follows. James Caspel, our neighborhood director, will give a brief introduction. He'll be followed by PMP, who are working on the refurbishment of Camelford Court, Camelford Walk, Clarendon, and Talbot Walk. They will go through your top 10 priorities and the initial refurbishment ideas for your blocks. They'll be followed by Janet Hall, Heat Network Engagement Manager, who will introduce the Heat Network proposals. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions and share your views. So feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat or raise your hand to ask directly. For any latecomers, a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our communication channels for residents unable to attend. I would ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute unless they're speaking. We do encourage, a camera on policy. So if you're comfortable with that, please do turn your cameras on, especially when you're speaking. So without further ado, I will now hand over to James Caspel.
Thank you, Bumi, and welcome to a great number of residents I can see are coming in. I can see lots of familiar names and lots of new names have joined us, so you're all very welcome. I'd like to also wish Nowruz Mubarak to those of you that celebrate Persian New Year. So why are we meeting today? So we're continuing a conversation that we've been having over many years now, and that is a co-design conversation about how do we work sensitively and collaboratively with you as residents to refurbish your home and the estate as a whole. P&P were selected following a highly competitive tender process. Over 40 residents participated in selecting P&P and the other design teams across the estate. So co-design is something, it's not just about what we actually design, it's about how we design as well. So I think tonight is the first opportunity that they have to share some of their fantastic cutting edge ideas for your homes and blocks. And we really do, as Bumi says, encourage you to ask questions in the chat, pop your hand up. And I know some of you are going to interrupt anyway, but we really welcome that because we want to have as interactive a discussion tonight as we can, and it will be the start of a discussion. We're not going to make any binding decisions tonight, and there's a lot of complicated technical stuff that we need to try and make as accessible as possible, at least for my own benefit, so that we can understand what those options are. So we're going to link back to the top 10 priorities, which were developed by residents in every block and published in July last year. And we're going to discuss what opportunities are available as part of the main block refurbishment. And we're going to capture those ideas, concerns and questions tonight, and also moving forwards through a range of ways, which we'll talk about later in the meeting. So there'll be an iterative process, if you like, as we move towards agreeing on a final design. Next slide, please. So just to remind ourselves of the shared vision. So it was promised by all layers of government to deliver a 21st century model for social housing on Lancaster West, making the existing buildings more energy efficient, greener and safer. Last January, the council's leadership team declared a climate emergency, and that means we're aiming now for homes to be carbon neutral by 2030. What that means for the refurbishment is there's an opportunity here to minimise disruption by doing things once and properly, if you like, from an energy performance point of view, rather than doing things to a certain standard now, but meaning later down the line, we're coming, and not long down the line, say 5, 6, 7 years, having to come back and replace things again. We want homes and spaces that are co-designed with residents, as I say, sensitively and collaboratively. And I know a number of you will have this week received in Talbot Walk your letters about the internal refurbishment programme, which is just about to start in your block. Next slide, please. So before I hand over to Sanand to take you through some really exciting ideas, I've got some really positive news. And that is that as of last week, we have secured 3 additional sources of funding, which means every single one of your blocks, we are now able to offer a gold standard in terms of the ideas that came up in early 2018, some of the energy performance improvements that we would be talking about probably 6 months ago are now deliverable. So what sort of things do I mean? It means things like triple glazed windows. We are now able to offer, if residents wishes to, install those in every block. For leaseholders in the room, there will be no additional charge for that. And indeed, for some of you, due to the requirements of some of the sources of funding, it will actually mean that the windows in their entirety would not be charged. There'll also be other building elements, and as we move forwards, we'll write in the level of detail to set out everybody's individual position. But I just want to share the fact that we have this additional funding. I remember when I started in early 2018, we had £30 million to deliver on the aspirations and expectations of residents. We now have £107 million across the estate. And so I'm really confident that we've got the funding in place now to do something truly special and crucially put a green recovery at the heart of Grenfell recovery. But we can only do that by working and listening with you, as we've tried to do so far. So that's it from me. I will hand over now to Sunand, and I really hope that you enjoy and engage throughout our evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, James. This is particularly fantastic for me to have a chance to connect again with the people on the estate in this way, because we were one of the practices involved in the Ideas events a couple of years ago, and we learned so much from you. We learned what your priorities were. We were shocked with everybody else about the neglect that had gone on, but the most wonderful thing was that it was actually optimistic and forward looking. And at that time, it seemed a bit unreal. But lo and behold, we are here now. And the funding is in place for pretty much all the ideas that we shared with you and the ones that you responded to. However, our job is not actually to make any decisions. And indeed, today, there won't be any need for making decisions, unless, of course, everybody says we must have this or that, because ultimately you're in charge, and our job is to give you the pros and cons of various options, to actually imaginatively think of what might happen, and then for you in due course to make those decisions, and also how those decisions are made and how the co-creation is organized. We want your input into that as well, not to just make it a fait accompli, but please tell us your ideas about what is the best way to communicate. So we want to tell you about what we've learned. We want to check if we've missed anything out. We're going to float some initial design ideas in the creation of new homes and neighborhoods. We want to get your first thoughts, and then finally we'll agree some next steps. Next, please. The story so far, I think you will all know the events that took place a couple of years ago and the ideas that came out of it. And since then, there's been continuous engagement. There have been surveys and canvassing of opinion around the estate, and one of the results of which is the identification of the key priorities that will give you in due course the homes that you want. So there was very high rates of response across the estate. We don't have a competition, need to have a competition about which block had the most, but it's there in front of you. And there was, of course, pretty consistent consensus about what people want done. You know, some basic things: windows, kitchens, bathrooms, access, boiler renewal, communal entrances, communications, electrics, flooring. We know that there's a range of those things that can be done, and some of those, as you know, are already underway. But we need to go a bit beyond that now, because we have funding to do more than that. Your priorities are listed here. These are the averages across the various blocks and their own responses to the set of priorities. But windows, kitchens, bathrooms, internal decor, heating and hot water replacement, door entry systems, refuse storage. We know how difficult that is at the moment. The introduction of lifts so that people don't have to climb up several flights of stairs in the rain, and drainage and water pressure are the top priorities. And ultimately to create a safer, greener, smarter and more accessible neighborhood and more accessible and safer homes. Next.
I'm going to come in on this one, Sedum, just to explain. We have actually had our first co-design event, which was when we discussed the options for roof improvement works at Camelford Court. And we have had some very useful and beneficial feedback from residents, which we're now looking at feeding back into the design. On the poll that was taken, there was an initial preference and concerns raised. And this resulted in actually a four-way split on the residents' preferences. That is, almost all options that we were looking at with green roofs and solar panels, there were pros and cons for all of those. So now we're going to be looking at providing responses and developing design options to respond to that range of feedback.
Thank you, Simon. Next, please. So we want to find the best way to communicate with you and to co-design with you. And just to say that today there'll be opportunities. Not only are we going to present various ideas, but there'll be 3 occasions where we'll break from this PowerPoint presentation so that we can all see each other and actually express some opinions. We want to make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible. It's fantastic to see 50 people altogether here, of which 35 or so will be the residents of the 4 blocks. And just to remind everyone that this is just the first step in the co-design process, and we want your ideas. Next, please. I think it's worth just setting out the orientation of these blocks and how you're going to see plans as they come up. You'll see plans like this constantly referred to, but just to say what's what. On this map, north is straight up. The bottom left is Clarendon Walk. Then you have Camelford Walk at right angles, and then Camelford Court behind that, and the smaller block of Talbot at the top. So just to orient everyone, because these plans will happen over and over again, and you might be able to recognize easily which bit we're talking about when we refer to it. And next, please. I'm going to hand over now to, who am I handing over to?
Simon, I'm going to talk
Simon,
now
you're going to
about...
take over in a minute?
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
yeah.
We're doing a good double act here. But just to say that once we've gone through all these rather dense slides, there'll be opportunities to stop and to record some interim decisions. But in the meantime, if anybody wants, if there's something that you want to immediately jump in on, please feel free, or put it in the chat and we'll be monitoring that. Over to you, Simon. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Edin. I'm just going to talk briefly through these slides, explaining that we've been getting some data to back up really what you've been saying about the repairs that are needed. And this is quite telling, this chart of data. It's showing that really there's far too much reporting of leaks and problems and plumbing issues and so on. In red, you can see there's really quite a high output, and James was explaining to us that really this means it's almost twice as much as you'd expect to have normally. There's bound to be some issues on some flats, but we're getting a much greater number, particularly in heating, hot water, plumbing, that kind of area with leaks. And also the door entry system is causing a lot of snags. So really this needs to be addressed, and really it's pointing to a lot of renewal of internal plumbing, and also addressing other areas which we've talked before in Camelford Court about roofs and other kind of leak issues. Can I have the next slide, please? We have these certificates, which you may have seen if you've seen people buying houses and property. They're just a standard performance certificate, but they are explaining that your buildings, while they're not terrible, they're not down at G, nor are they very good. And we should be trying to get your buildings much higher, up to a level B or better. So that's a gauge of where everything stands at the moment. Next slide, please. Yes, we've been talking about doing surveys, and we've done some structural surveys of Camelford Court. We've had 2 bits of roof opened up from below to examine the timber, and we're going to be doing concrete surveys as well shortly on the other blocks. We've also had a roof survey looking at the felt roof, if you like, the covering systems of the roof, to check them, and we're looking at the works we might need to do to renew and replace those and add insulation and so on. Next slide, please. We've got a drone survey which is showing this from this picture. So we're doing assessment from above, looking at the building fabric, but also we've been analysing the information which we've got from a measured survey. There's been a 3D survey done of the estate. We've received that data now, so we're importing that model into our own information, and we can now develop a 3D model of the estate for the new schemes and the new works we're proposing. What we've also got, as well as a 3D digital model, is we're developing a physical model. Next slide. So we've got made as an object that you can look at when we are able to meet with you and have some events and pop-up events on the estate in the near future. You'll be able to look at these, and we'll be able to explain the existing situation and the proposals, if you like, a before and after we'll be able to use on these models. So we hope these will be useful tools for you to understand what's going on with the blocks. These two particular ones we're showing you here, this is looking at Camelford Court and Camelford Walk. Next slide, please. Yeah, windows. Now those are single glazed. Generally, they are causing condensation, particularly in kitchens and bathrooms. I'm sure you're aware of that. And obviously that's bad, that buildup of moisture. There's a risk of mold growth, and it's an unhealthy environment. So we've been examining that, are looking at window options, which we'll come to later in terms of window renewal. Next slide, please. Some thermographic photos are showing here. We'll be looking at the fabric and what's currently there. There seems to be very little insulation in the walls. We're going to be doing some more surveys to check if any cavity insulation was added. We talked about doing the surveys on the roofs, and obviously there's some issues where you've got basements underneath the flats, there's no insulation there. And what these photos, which a thermographic camera they're good at showing, is able to explain where the biggest areas of heat loss are. So on this block, we're showing how the brickwork is kind of orangey colour, but as it goes into that whiter colour, that's where the biggest heat loss, and that's really all the the heat coming out the windows. And there's a couple more photos there next to below the same block, just a different version. You can see more of the brickwork holding some of the heat. Again, all the heat coming out the windows. So that's photos of from your estate, just an example. The picture on the right, bottom corner right, is really where the photo should be. In other words, showing much less heat loss. So you can see the windows there, yeah, kind of more greens and blues. That's what we'll be looking to achieving when the project goes further. And we'll be doing more thermographic surveys to get more detail, to look at exactly where the heat's going and which particular details need addressing most urgently. So next slide, please. Further issues as a range, really. We talked about door security and intercom system already. There's some photos of it in place. How the entrance is done into the staircase areas. We're looking at the internal corridors, redecorating those. I think there's also elements of replacing doors going to happen. But examining that situation in that next couple of pictures, we're talking there, showing you the bins. We know the bin chutes are too noisy when they're used. The covers don't always shut properly, and they're too small. So a method of improving bin collection and recycling, which currently isn't properly available, is going to be part of this work as well. Next slide, please. Really now we want to just pause, and we're going to use a tool to just capture anything that you want to tell us about that we have missed in terms of the comfort that's in your homes, and any issues you think that are important that we should add into the mix, just in terms of understanding how you're currently living now. So we'll be pulling up a little board in a moment with Harriet to capture any comments you have. So really I'm throwing this open to everybody gathered here to chip in, let us know what you'd like to drop in onto little, we're going to make little post-it notes that you can write, or we will write on your behalf. Here's the board, come up.
And already in the chat, Linda has said that the ceiling heights are very low, and Harry has also said the ceiling heights are very low in Clarendon. We've noticed that.
Very low in Camelford as well.
Yeah, they're all very similar design, aren't they, in many ways, although there are some differences. Thank you. Can I just check, those ceiling heights within the flats as well as in the corridors? Are you talking specifically about the corridors or the flats as well?
Within the flats.
Yeah. Oh, Harry says mainly corridors. There's Matthew saying that the house in Camelford Court gets to 32 degrees and they were insulated a few years ago. And there is Antoinette as well, Upper Clarendon, overheating, a serious issue. Several accidents with pipes, waste pipes blocking. I think people are going faster than you can, Harriet, here in the chat. They're doing really coming in thick and fast there.
There's also
So some advantages. Some flats are warm, so you don't have to use radiators. Sorry, did somebody speak then?
Yes, and we also have plumbing issues and leaks.
Yeah.
Blocked drains and toilets.
Yeah. Several accidents with pipes, waste pipes, blockage and leak, consistent in Upper Camelford Walk.
Electrical wires running the length of Clarendon Walk horizontally.
There's a question here about asbestos. Who's best to pick that one up?
I think Record It will be tracking through what we do with each of these in terms of solutions.
Is it worth me just coming in on the asbestos?
Yes, please. I thought you might.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. As is not atypical for properties and blocks of the age that we're talking about tonight, there's a presence of asbestos, not more than would usually be the case of buildings of this age where it hasn't been removed. So as part of the internal refurbishment programme, which is moving pace now from Moorland House, we're about to start the works there, having residents selected what their options are. We'll be moving around to Talbot Walk and the rest of the estate. Now, as part of those conversations, we will talk to residents, and any resident that has a particular concern about asbestos and would like it removed from their property, we would do it as part of the internal refurbishment. Now, there would be the presence of asbestos as well in communal areas, and what we would look to do once we've decided what the overall block design would look like is try and factor that in to remove it as part of that. So there's perhaps two opportunities to remove asbestos. Now, that said, I want to be absolutely clear that where we're not doing internal refurbishment, for example, in leaseholder properties, the asbestos would remain. It's down to the leaseholder to remove that if they wish to. The vast majority of the asbestos that is in use in the blocks is of a very low risk level, but we understand the anxiety of asbestos across the estate and the preference for residents to remove it, and we would do that on a property by property basis.
Thanks, Jane.
There's a question. Can I just get clarity on one of the questions? I think from Uba. Quality of the tap extension is quite poor. Can you just say a bit more about that, Uba?
Uba, do you want to unmute yourself and just expand on your comments? Okay. Right. Well, we've got more comments on drainage. It seems like drainage is such a massive issue. I think we've got like 5 or 6 on drainage, blocked drains and pipe work leading to, solvent pipes. Yes.
Okay, so we'll pick those up and try to understand the nuances of all that. But I think point taken very much. General dilapidations, cracks on steps, the entrances don't look nice.
Water pressure, uneven floors, the noise from the neighbors and the creaky floors. Yes.
Wake up in the middle of the night. I remember those conversations when we visited a couple of years ago, and the stairs also being creaky.
Dangerous staircases when wet from rain. I presume that's slip resistance of staircases.
This is a good point here about ceilings are currently being lowered even more in the voided properties to put in spotlights. That's an interesting one.
So could I just come in on two of those? So the first one is the water pressure. So we've looked at that because 25% of tenanted properties now have had some form of refurbishment. And we've found that whilst the water pressure isn't particularly great, it's average for London. And the main issue with water pressure has been the district heating system, which you're going to hear later on about plans to replace that. As part of the internal refurbishment, we have been putting in new cylinders, and the cold water comes straight off the mains, so the pressure is much better. And the cylinder, not only does it provide resilience should the district system go down, it also provides greater pressure. So that's something that we're looking to deliver benefits for residents as part of the internal refurbishment ahead of the replacement of the wider network. On the ceiling heights issue, so to be absolutely clear, we aren't reducing the ceiling height from where it is at the moment. We're removing the asbestos, which takes it up to the slab, as it were, and then reducing the height slightly so that we can put spotlights in and potentially in other blocks, looking at sprinklers and so on. I do appreciate that the ceilings aren't particularly high in blocks, but we've found that where people have moved into homes with the ceilings, the fact that you don't have lighting pendants and shades hanging down and so on and so forth has meant that most people haven't felt much of a difference. It's about a 4 centimetre lowering, if you like, on average.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Have we captured uneven flooring in the corridor of first level Talbot Walk?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
That's, and of course, everything that's on the chat will be recorded as well. There was an interesting one here about the asbestos being there to prevent fire spread. If it is removed, what will it be replaced with? So who would like to give a quick answer to that one?
Well, just from a fire safety point of view, obviously, it will need to be looked into in terms of ensuring that absolutely that the fire resistance of your separation between flats is maintained as part of the works. So any asbestos that's removed certainly will have that will be investigated what the fire separation is and make sure it's maintained within the flat.
Yes, and if the asbestos was used for fire stopping, then that can be replaced by safer materials.
That's right.
I think it's also important to add that it is permissible to leave asbestos where it is if removing it is actually more hazardous than appropriately encapsulating it and leaving it. An asbestos consultant is able to advise the project team just because asbestos is there, although it is better to remove it, there are also situations where it can be more appropriate to leave it in situ.
Thank you. There's a critical one here. We have no say at the moment on internal refurbs of voids, especially making everything open plan. James, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. So just just on the previous point, and I'll come to that one. So as part of the internal refurbishment, we're not just meeting building regulations, we are fast surpassing them, and that's a theme you'll hear throughout the evening with the main block refurbishment as well. As part of the internal refurbishment, we are bringing new internal doors with a 30-minute fire resistance to all habitable rooms, so everything other than bathrooms, which is well beyond current building regulations. And we're also installing a series of radio-linked smoke and heat alarms through all habitable rooms as well. So there's lots of things, and there's more, but I won't go into too much detail, that we will do to improve fire safety. In terms of the void standard, so there's two aspects to it. So the void standard was co-designed. Hundreds of residents participated in the open house sessions that were held across the estate. And what we've looked to do is install both the most sort of aesthetically neutral, practical, lowest maintenance suite of internal fixtures and fittings, if you like, in those properties, so that they last, a good 20, 30 years before needing major refurbishment again. When we come around to the internal refurbishment, we have a wide range of choice. It's a choice that bluntly will far surpass not just what was offered under, say, the Decent Homes programme, but would far surpass what people who are buying privately in new build developments are offered in terms of choice. So off the top of my head, it's 12 different kitchen ranges once you include the colours and so on. We've got a range of styles as well. So we've got more contemporary modern looking aesthetics, more traditional looking and period looking aesthetics as well. And so I'm hoping that residents, once we engage with them on the internal refurbishment, will feel that there's something in there for everyone to choose from.
Great.
James.
Thank you. Can I don't know how we're doing for time, but I love this comment here from Arthur D. I personally love the corridors and hope they can be retouched as opposed to being turned into generic cookie cutter aesthetic, which has no personality. Are you talking there about the internal corridors or the walkways? Arthur, do you want to share that with us?
I was just talking about the actual corridor. I'm in Upper Talbot. I know some people disagree with me when I've spoken with other people who live here. They disagree with me, but like part of what made me fall in love with the building and the block. The building and the block is that it's a really unique aesthetic on the estate, and I feel like to sort of overlay that with something that just feels very generic. I'm really not a fan of that generic aesthetic. When you replace something with and upgrade it to modern things, I think it's going to lose a load of personality. So I think from my perspective, the refurb needs to take into account that the building was built when it was, and it has a certain aesthetic to it that's part of its style, and hopefully that can be considered in the refurbishment, basically. Sorry, I've got baby crying. My baby's crying. I do apologise.
I mean, Harry feels that the outside of Clarendon Walk and Camelford Walk don't look very nice. So there are views here. No sunlight really gets into the block. That's an interesting one as well. I think this would be the advantage. I think once the lockdown starts lifting, for us to come and meet people actually in situ and understand these things a bit more. That'll be great. But I have to say that your comments are amazing. I mean, there are hundreds of comments here, and we seem to have done better than face-to-face meetings in terms of sheer comments. I think we had about the same number in the ideas day on our boards. But thank you very much. Is this a good moment maybe to pause and continue, and then because there'll always be a chance to come back and add more comments later?
Yes, Simon, that's fine. Let's move on with the presentation. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't answer the plan to open. Oh, there was no answer to the open plan, someone says. So should we just?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. My apologies, Galaxy Note 8. Yeah, so we are not making open plan as standard. We have piloted open plan for the purposes of engagement and showing the choice, but we aren't, where there isn't already open plan, we aren't introducing open plan for various reasons. We say most residents, yeah, I think it is a minority of residents like open plan, but some do. So we have, I can certainly think of a couple of projects on that side of the estate where residents have asked us to make open plan, and we have done that, and we would discuss that as part of the internal refurbishment. But it's certainly not an objective to make everything open plan.
Thank you for that. And Uba, we will be talking about the staircases shortly, and that hopefully might start answering your question. So over to Annalisa.
I'm actually going to hand over to Emily.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for chipping in just there. I'm just going to take you through some of the different aspects we've started to look at, and hopefully it'll start to address some of the comments that's been picked up a moment ago. So the refurbishment of your homes will involve quite a lot of different aspects, which come together to make Lancaster West a model 21st century estate. So these are broken down into sort of 4 different strands. The first strand of work is looking at your home and the upgrades that were required internally. So that's looking at the bathrooms, the kitchens, and sort of the general redecoration inside. Second upgrades is looking at the communal areas. So we'll be touching on stairs and lifts, the corridors, and a new main entrance to sort of wrap all that together. We'll also be looking at the building generally, so mainly the external envelope. So that's sort of looking at the windows, the roofs, the doors, and all those the different aspects that makes your building and how it performs. And finally, there's a further strand which looks at wider upgrades to the general neighbourhood. So that's looking at an estate-wide strategy. So that will touch on district heating systems and maybe solar panels, and maybe later landscaping. Today, we are going to focus predominantly on the communal areas and how your building would work. So next slide, please. So as we develop the proposal, maximising fire safety will be a key consideration. So I'm just going to hand over to our fire consultant, David, to explain a little bit more.
Hi, thank you, Emily. So I'm David Bostelman. I'm a chartered engineer at Trigon Fire Safety. We are just a fire safety consultancy that and our team will be helping to develop the fire strategy for the refurbishment, and we'll be considering all the fire safety aspects. And as well as ensuring that the proposals meet the statutory requirements, so building regulations, we'll be definitely going further than that, and working with the team and the residents to advise where fire safety improvements could be made throughout the buildings. So an example that I think has already been given of that is ensuring materials can meet the highest fire safety standards. And really, I won't go into too much detail today, but just want to say that we want this to be a collaborative relationship. So please do discuss it with us, and we want to work with residents and respond to any questions that you have about it. And we're looking forward to working with the team on this project. So yeah, I'll just leave it there, and next slide.
Thank you, David. So to start going through each of the different areas we're looking at, so we understand from the top 10 priorities, the kitchens and the bathrooms and internal sort of refurbishment is a key priority across the blocks. So just to touch on that quickly, this stream of work is run separately by Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team, but in concurrence with the main works. And it's to provide new quality kitchens and bathrooms, as well as the internal redecoration, which there'll be some resident choice available as well. As mentioned earlier, Talbot Walk is sort of the next on the list to go through this refurbishment, and letters have already been sent out to residents. Next slide, please. So another key priority that's shared across the blocks are the windows. Next slide, and we'll be starting to look at these in a bit more detail as we move forward. So some of the things we'll look at is sort of whether they're double glazed or triple glazed. The key difference to go to triple glazed is that they'll keep your homes warmer, but they'd also be able to be better at keeping noise outside as well. We'd also look at how they open and discuss with you what the key sort of drivers would be. So whether it's a security issue or maintenance, or whether they need to be child friendly, and how important ease of cleaning is. So all that we can sort of move forward and discuss with you to decide how they open, and then also how they what they look like, what they've been made of. So there's possibilities to look at aluminium windows, but with the timber inside, so that might give you a warmer interior, or if the preference is to have a full aluminium window inside and outside, that's also something we can discuss. And what we would like to do is to eventually get samples of these windows, maybe based at baseline, so that you can come and trial them out, see how they operate, and basically be able to look and see how they feel. Next slide, please. So next we will be looking at also the entrance sequence, so how you arrive at your block, and how you make your way up to your front door. So this will include new entrances with new intercom systems, potential lift access, and improvements to the communal corridors. Next slide, please. So starting with the lifts, we are currently exploring some initial location ideas. So the little yellow squares are the locations we are looking at. So it's one on each end of each block. So Talbot Walk, Clarendon and Camelford Walk. As you can see the image in the middle, we are locating these lifts next to where the stairs are. So on the day, you can have a choice of which ones you want to take. It also helps with wayfinding and just tie the whole entrance together. There's quite a lot of work we need to do at the moment at ground level just to see how this would all interface, how it works with the existing spaces. So as part of this, it might affect the bin storage, so that would be reconsidered. And we know the bin chutes are a problem at the moment, so this is all going to be discussed with you and sort of decided how we can sort of develop that. And finally, the images on the end, they look a little strange, but it's just to tell you that there will be opportunity to discuss the material choices inside. So it could be anything, so metal to timber veneer cladding. But again, we'll explore all of that with you as we move forward. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we'll also be looking at the communal spaces. So these would be the corridors within the blocks. As part of the overall thermal strategy, we are looking to internalize these spaces, so make them indoors, and this will make it easier to keep your homes warm. So every home will have a new front door, and this is being rolled out on a separate program by the Lancaster West team. And as part of our looking at this area, we'll be exploring opportunities to address the step that's currently between your flat and the corridor. It's not likely we'll be able to remove it because it's potentially structural, but we can look at the different options and discuss them with you. There may also be opportunity to remove the separating wall. I think it's in Clarendon at the moment, and this might open up access so you'd be able to go from one end of the corridor to the other and not get stuck in the middle of the stairs. And also finally the finishes. So you can see a palette of finishes in the middle. These are first thoughts, so we'll be taking into account comments such as so what Arthur brought up earlier about existing kind of features, and so bringing that into the mix and working with you to develop that as well. But the intention is to try and make these corridor spaces warmer, more welcoming, and safer with brighter lighting. Next slide, please.
Emily, I have a question from Claire. Would the lift replace the stairs, or is the intention to have both lifts and stairs?
The intention is to keep the stairs as well. Yeah, you'd always have stairs with the lifts.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. That's it.
Okay.
So carry on.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so it brings us on to heating and hot water. So we know this is a key issue for a lot of residents, and upgrades for this is being looked into at the moment as part of a wider strategy on how we deliver that. So I will hand over to Janet to explain this in a bit more detail.
Hi, so I'm part of a small team that has been brought in to look at a solution for the future heating and hot water of the whole estate. And the option that we're currently looking at is a heat network, which would essentially be an upgrade and replacement of the existing heat network. So if could I have the next slide, please? So I think most people are aware that today you receive your heating from a boiler that is located on Camelford Court, and that boiler is coming towards the end of its life. The pipe work in your buildings is coming towards the end of its life, and there has been quite a lot of ad hoc upgrades done to single flats, which then have plugged into this old system. So what we're looking at as part of the refurbishment program is how we can replace all of that and make sure that the new installations that are going into your home actually plug into a new modern system that works for everyone. So that boiler today is powered by gas, and that's the other aspect of the project that we need to look at is in this goal to achieve a net zero carbon estate. we need to move away from gas, and there is UK legislation that's coming out to support that. So we are looking at different renewable alternatives. Next slide, please. So just to explain at a very high level what a heat network is, it's essentially plumbing at a large scale. It delivers heat from a central energy centre to each building, and then from each building there is a finer network that goes into flats. Today, most of your properties don't have any heating control at all, which is kind of standard of a very old-fashioned heat network. The more modern systems that we're looking at will give you levels of control that you don't currently have in your radiators, and on a room-by-room basis as well. And regarding the energy centre itself, we're looking at quite a few options. So it's looking like it will be hopefully air source or potentially sewage source. We'll have a bit more information on that coming up. So next slide. And yeah, so just to give a bit of an overview of kind of the timeline and development of the solutions that we're looking at. We currently have technical teams working across the estate to evaluate what options could work for the renewable heating. So these two guys were out a couple of weeks ago at the walkways and essentially dropped a thermometer down one of the sewers to find out whether we could actually capture heat from wastewater and use that to heat the estate. So we're waiting for test results from that, and we will evaluate whether that is a potential option that we could use. And then in the next month or so, we're going to be launching a series of co-design questions to bring residents into the conversation about what the future heating could be and how it could work for your flat specifically. So I will be popping up at events across the estate, and we'll be doing kind of live web engagement as well. Next slide. So we have an event happening on March the 29th for the whole estate, which is just going to explain what I've introduced tonight in a bit more detail. And hopefully lots of you have already responded to the heating and hot water survey. This survey is just a way of us getting a bit more detail on what the issues are for heating and hot water, of which there are many in your buildings, I'm aware, and it is a priority. And to help us design what the future solution will be. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So before we move on to the sustainability and the zero carbon ideas, we thought it'd be great to just have another quick chat. So we'll be jumping onto the Miro board again, but it's to ask what your thoughts are on what's just been discussed about interiors and communal areas. If you have any thoughts on the windows, and if you have any questions on the heat network. So we'll just switch over again quickly.
And just to say that it doesn't have to be only about those things, because we know that residents are concerned about a lot of things before they get on to things like sustainability and so on. They've been posted up issues about, worries about overheating. Will triple glazing make it worse? I think I can tell you that triple glazing should not make it worse, because the only way really in a climate like ours to deal with solar gain is to open windows and have good through ventilation in flats, unless you have air conditioning. But triple glazing won't make it worse. And of course, our climate is getting worse, and overheating is a big issue. And solar shading may be one way of dealing with that, or having special glass that stops the sun coming in. There's also worries about security, a lot of material on the chat about security. And that is something that absolutely is part and parcel of the lift, stairs, door entry systems, and so on. And just want to assure people that we might be talking a lot about these technical matters which are a bit more complex, like the heat network and so on, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to be attending to these other issues like security, noise, and those sorts of things. So lots more coming in.
So we've got a comment from Kenza. Automatic entrances would be helpful as it's very hard to open the heavy doors with full hands. Sanad, would you like to respond to that? This is about automatic entrances, door entry systems.
Well, as we've said, I think the aim today is to record all the issues, and we will certainly take that on and understand fully the problem with entry systems. Problem with heavy doors, and one of the paradoxes of designing for draft proofing and so on is that the doors can sometimes get heavy, and we will certainly consider whether having an assisted door opening is viable.
Sure. James, I have a question for you. Claire would like to know if the front door to leasehold flats would be replaced too. So this is front entrance doors.
Yeah, understand. So under the terms of the lease, whereas obviously for tenants, we as a landlord are responsible for every element of the building. The terms of the lease, the door itself is the responsibility of the leaseholder. What we would allow is that leaseholders would buy into our front door programme, if you like, so that they're able to benefit from the fact that the council is obviously buying literally thousands of doors at the moment. So that's one thing we are looking to do. Obviously, there'll be movement in the building regulations, and we'll be required as a landlord to check relatively frequently that front doors especially are to the required fire resistance, but also that they have their closers on them. So we are now installing fire doors with external closers to minimise the disruption. So for leaseholders, we wouldn't be gifting the doors, but I would also say that if you look at the bigger picture, there are lots of things which leaseholders will benefit from because your leases are repair only. So as I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of triple glazing, in terms of new lifts, there wouldn't be charges for that element. So whilst we're not in a position to say there will be no charges for leaseholders, or there will be no element that leaseholders will remain responsible for, what I will say is that over the next sort of 2 to 4 years, leaseholders will benefit from significant improvements at no additional cost.
Great, thanks, James.
Can I just pick up one question that came up on the chat, which is about windows?
Yes.
Some windows have been already exhibited and people have looked at them, and so they are wondering what the relationship of that to the windows on Camelford, Talbot and Clarendon. Can somebody answer that, whether the windows that were exhibited are the final ones, or are they going to be, are we looking again at windows?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. So to answer your question, Sunand, absolutely, and you're going to show us tonight, I believe, some of the talk about some of those options as we've already started to do.
Yeah.
So we have had windows shown, so certainly in the open house in Camelford Walk and also here on Barrington. So we undertook a windows pilot. That was very much about getting residents' initial views. Now in the walkways where I am sitting tonight, it was very clear what people wanted. In some other blocks, it was also. Of course, at that point, we didn't know how much funding we would have. And as we've already started to talk about tonight, now what is on the table is the highest specification of windows that we could have conceived of. So no decision has been made on the windows, and tonight is about restarting that conversation. Yeah. Now we know that the sky's the limit.
Sure.
Thank you, James.
Can
I just carry on with one more thing about windows? Sorry, go on.
Yes. Will the entire windows be non-chargeable to leaseholders, or only the triple glazed part?
So yeah, so that somebody knows their leases very well. So because obviously the frame would need to be larger, as well as the glazing, the whole lot would not be rechargeable in terms of the difference. It varies for different blocks. So some of the blocks, so Camelford Court and Camelford Walk, none of the windows will be recharged at all to leaseholders, whether you're resident or non-resident. For Clarendon and Talbot, the difference between double, well, to install double and then to install triple will not be charged. For resident leaseholders, there will be a reduction on that cost of the double glazing, if you like, a 54.4% discount with an overall 15,000 cap over the 5-year period. And for non-resident leaseholders, that cap doesn't apply, and nor does that discount. So it's particularly complicated with this particular lot because of all the different funding requirements. But nobody, in terms of the choice between double and triple, what we're really keen to do is make sure that leaseholders weren't in a position where they were sort of almost trying to deny that benefit because they're worried about cost, if you see what I mean. So the fact that we're now able to talk about triple, there will be no additional cost at all. And in fact, because of the grant funding criteria, as I say, it means across the board for 2 of the blocks, your windows will not be chargeable.
Thank you. There's a question here from Matthew. Do the windows have to be plastic? The answer is no, they don't. And plastic is not very sustainable in windows. And to my mind, doesn't look very nice either. But of course, if there's a unanimous vote from all the residents to have plastic windows, we'll have to rethink that. But I think generally on the chat, preference is coming across for aluminium windows at the moment, but maybe they're very durable on the outside. And we will show you, I think we've shown you already the options, and we'll continue with that conversation.
Right.
There's one more question that's worth picking up from Antoinette about there's no ventilation in the properties. So even perfect windows, they would, to exclude the cold or hot, they will still need to be open some of the time. So just one point there, Sedum, you've got some experience of it as well, or more knowledge perhaps than me on using them. But our understanding is we're putting in an Mvhr, which is a heat recovery system, that would provide the ventilation. And in the summertime, you can open windows to reduce the heat, in other words, to get some cross ventilation. But in terms of the ventilation, the plan is to put in a system which would provide a constant level of low level ventilation to
fresh air.
Fresh air, absolutely, yeah, bringing in fresh air,
and
ventilation, filtering out pollen and so on.
Yeah, I think we'll talk a little more about it in a moment.
I think another key comment is signage and wayfinding.
Yes.
Do you want to comment on that, Sandy?
Was that a question to me, Bumi?
Yes, signage and wayfinding.
Yeah, absolutely. And this came up in the earlier engagement as well. And I think somebody said that you can't even put a postcode into Google and easily find the place. I think there has to be a whole signage strategy for the estate and make it, really rethink it from first principles. How do you make it easy for people to find it and for deliveries and things like that? So very much take that on board.
Right. Are double doors for balconies an option, and can the doors open outwards? Kenza, do you want to expand on that? Kenza? So I'm not sure which block this is. Right, okay.
Well, we'll certainly, again, we will look at that.
Okay.
I think she needs, hello, sorry, I'm from Upper Camelford. I think what she means is that at the moment our balcony doors open into our living room, and whether when we get the new doors, the doors can open out so that they're not taking up space within the living room or the dining area.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, we would certainly look at that.
Thank you.
There's a question here about the current windows being central pivot. The central pivot windows don't work as you've said in your chat, because it's actually almost impossible to make a central pivoting window properly seal and the mechanism breaks. So I think one thing we can say is that it's extremely unlikely that our replacement windows will be central pivot. Is that a good moment to move on to the final section? And we'll come back with a wrap up in a minute.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Can everyone see the presentation again now?
Yeah.
Great. Great. Well, thank you everyone for your comments so far. I'm just going to take you through now the energy efficiency improvement measures that we're looking at for your homes. And the starting point really is, what does this term net zero carbon mean for you and your homes? A net zero carbon home is really a healthier and more comfortable home, and it will be have better thermal comfort throughout the summer and the winter, better ventilation, and also better indoor air quality. Due to the reduced requirement for heating, there'll be lower energy bills, and also that translates to lower leasehold service charges. There'll also be more soundproofing between the flats. The additional funding is really a great opportunity to co-design and refurbish the buildings to standards that others will look to follow. And we'll have a great opportunity to kind of future-proof the buildings to ensure we're meeting the government's carbon targets, both for now, but also in the future. So I'm just going to go through different elements of the building and talk about how we can upgrade them as part of the refurbishment works. So I'm just going to start with the roof. The existing roofs have very little insulation. As Simon mentioned earlier, we have done some initial roof surveys already. The roofs do let out a lot of heat from the building, so we're looking to improve the levels of insulation by adding mineral wool insulation, which is A1 rated. This will really help to reduce that heat loss, and we could also introduce an insulated parapet upstand to the roofs. This kind of system is called a warm roof, and you can see here there's kind of 4 options that we could look at for the roof. The one on the left is just the warm roof system, so just insulating the roof. And then moving on, there's an option to put solar panels on the roof. This would be beneficial because it would also help to generate electricity, which can contribute to lowering energy bills further. The next option is looking at a green roof, which could help to improve biodiversity on the roof. And also a green roof helps to further reduce heat loss. And the final option is looking at kind of a combination of the two. So it is possible to have some roof as a green roof and some roof with solar panels as well. It's worth mentioning at this point that we are planning to undertake structural surveys of all the blocks to make sure that we can take the weight of a new green roof. And we're going to discuss that in a bit more detail at the end of the webinar. So just looking now onto the energy performance of the building as a whole, and starting with the external walls, we're going to go through 3 different options for insulation. The first one is looking at cavity wall insulation. This is insulation within the existing wall, so between the existing brickwork and the blockwork. We are actually undertaking surveys to establish where additional insulation has already been put into the walls. We understand in Camelford Court there has been some additional insulation already put in the walls, so we're just making sure we completely understand the build-up in all the other blocks. If we find in the other blocks there is no existing insulation, there may be an option to introduce blown insulation in the cavity. This would make some difference in terms of the building performance, but it wouldn't necessarily be able to deal with all the issues we've discussed in terms of damp and condensation. And it wouldn't necessarily get us to the kind of high energy efficiency carbon targets we're hoping to achieve. So just looking at the pros and cons for each option in terms of the cavity wall insulation, there wouldn't be any impact for doing this to residents' internal floor area, and there'd be quite minimal disruption as there wouldn't be a huge amount of works proposed. With this option, we could still install the new windows we've been talking about and also look at new fresh air ventilation. The cons really are that this option wouldn't support our kind of high energy efficiency aims for the building, and there could still be issues of damp and cold spots and drafts in the flats, as we can't solve all these issues just by introducing cavity wall insulation. So the second option for insulation we're looking at is internal wall insulation. And this would be a layer of insulation on your external wall, but inside the flat. And this is the window, the wall with the windows and your radiators are at the moment. we'd be looking to introduce in this option about 12.5 centimetres of insulation to the inside, and that would result in a small loss of area to your homes, about 4% of the floor area on each level of flats. It is worth saying that if any option where we're looking to introduce insulation, we will be doing overheating analysis to make sure that any additional insulation doesn't result in any overheating of the flats. We would hope that everything we're doing would help to reduce the existing issues of overheating. One option we would look at as well as introducing solar shading, and if that is found to be necessary through the modelling we'll be doing with our engineers. And we'll also be looking at the heating system, as Janet spoke about already, looking at making that a lot more efficient. So at the moment, the overheating is partly caused by the leaking heat coming out of the communal heating pipes. So that's something that we need to really look at holistically. So looking at the pros and cons for internal wall insulation, the pros is really that this would really improve the building performance from where we are currently, which will make warmer and greener homes, and your energy bills would be reduced. The cons is that it would be difficult to achieve the kind of highest level of energy reduction that we would hope to achieve, as it wouldn't be quite as efficient as external wall insulation. There also might still be some localized areas of damp, cold spots and drafts, just a few areas that we wouldn't be able to solve just through internal wall insulation. Residence floor space would also need to be reduced, as I mentioned before, and there would also be disruption during the works as we would need to come into your homes to do the work. We would hope to do everything at the same time. So if you're having your internal flat refurbished and also your windows replaced, the internal insulation would be happen at the same time to try and reduce disruption as much as possible, which is our kind of key driver really for the project. So the final option is looking at external wall insulation to the outside of the building. And this would involve wrapping the whole building with insulation, which includes the roof and the basements and the external walls. So it's really like a tea cozy effect, wrapping the whole building with insulation. The option here would be, we could look at changing the balconies. So at the moment, most of the balconies are inset balconies, and we could look at making them external balconies. That would really help us in terms of how we would be able to wrap the building more efficiently. And one potential benefit would be that those internal balconies would become part of your living spaces. So the living spaces would be increased in size. And with this option, we'd be able to achieve really the highest levels of energy performance. And as I explained before, we would also be looking at solar shading and other measures to make sure that we don't have any overheating of the buildings. So in terms of the pros for this, this option really does let us achieve the energy efficiency targets that we're aiming for and help us support the project's net zero carbon aims. There would be no reduction in residents' internal floor space. Some flats might gain floor space if we decide together that we like the idea of having projecting balconies and we actually want to take that internal floor space as part of the flat. Most of the construction would happen from the outside of the building, which we're hoping would help reduce disruption to residents if we went down this option. The proposed design here should help prevent any future issues of drafts, damps and condensation. And there's also an opportunity here to help strengthen the estate identity with a new brickwork skin, which we would design very closely in co-design with you. The kind of cons of this option are really that it's the highest upfront costs. There is also, it would also take longer to construct. So although there might be less disruption inside the homes, there would be scaffolding outside the building and potentially a longer kind of construction program. We will still need to come into the flats to replace the windows and also the ventilation systems. So in terms of how this might look, we can explore material options with you through the co-design process. We would consider robust materials that really last well over time. For example, looking at brickwork, we can of course explore options for brickwork colours and patternings during the process and taking on board your comments about how you feel about the look and feel of the existing buildings. It's worth just highlighting again that we were only looking at A1 and A2 rated buildings for all these three options. So just in terms of the ventilation, as Sedum mentioned before, we are looking at installing a mechanical heat recovery ventilation system to the buildings. At the moment, you need to open your windows to get ventilation. So when you open the window, all the warm air from the inside is lost to the outside. Having a kind of a mechanical heat exchanger allows fresh air into the building without having to lose heat to the outside of the building. The unit itself recovers about 80 to 90% of warmth from the air going out of the building to the fresh air coming in. So it heats it up without actually mixing the stale and the clean air. And the air coming in also is filtered, which is has a lot of health benefits, especially for people who have allergies and who might suffer from asthma, as the air coming in will be kind of cleaned from pollutants from the outside. We're looking into options as to where these Mvhr units could be located. The main driver for us would be to minimise any impact of ductwork inside your homes. So we can do this by locating ductwork in storage cupboards and bathroom ceilings. And where we need to have a duct coming through a room, we made sure it would be boxed out in the corner, so we wouldn't need to lower the ceilings any further. So I'm just going to pass over to Harriet now, who will explain, kind of do a bit of a summary of what I've just said, and also explain how we're looking at Passive House NFIT as a standard that we could aim for.
Thanks, Annalisa. Yeah, so we'd be looking to explore NFIT as a proposal, and I'm just going to do a quick presentation to explain a little bit about that. Thanks. So NFIT Passive House is an independently certified standard for improving the condition of existing buildings. It demands the highest quality of design and construction and aims to improve thermal comfort, lower energy bills, improve the air quality and reduce carbon footprint. Most existing buildings in the UK are inefficient and rely solely on fossil fuels. So the low quality building fabric quickly loses heat and leads to higher energy bills with little protection against fuel poverty. NFIT is based on 5 key principles. Number 1 is the insulation. So just like you'd wrap up warm, insulation to the roof, to the walls and to the ground slab are essential. And properly insulated buildings protect against condensation, damp, mold growth, and they can all lead to health problems. The second thing is the air tightness. So heat can also escape the building through gaps in the construction, and also cold drafts can be felt through the gaps. And that by removing these drafts, the comfort is greatly improved. The third thing is the triple glazed windows. So windows are key in NFIT, especially in the winter when they harness the heat from the sun. And in the summer, when the heat is more intense, cleverly designed solar shading provides protection against the overheating. The windows can be opened at any time for additional cooling or ventilation, but they are not relied upon to get the fresh air into the flat. The fourth thing is thermal bridges. Now, thermal bridges are areas in the building where there is a clear pathway for heat to bypass the insulation, creating cold spots, which can lead to damp. So big thermal bridges, such as the balconies, can be internalized, with modern thermal bridge-free balconies being provided to the outside. And the last thing is the Mvhr. So the mechanical ventilation side provides fresh, clean air filtered into the flat, improving the air quality. It removes stale air and excess humidity from bathrooms and kitchens, and also allergens such as pollen and pollution. And the heat recovery can warm the incoming air by cleverly transferring the heat from the stale air without mixing the air. It's a really efficient system, and by using the existing heat, uses less energy. Together with using the green energy on the estate, either from the new district heating system or from heat pumps, and clean energy from the solar panels, NFIT looks at the whole building as an approach and ensures high quality, resilient homes, which are designed for a net carbon zero future. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Harriet. Oh, we're going again. So just to summarise what we've just said before we have another breakout session. So what does all this mean for your homes? So this means that the more insulated your building is, the less heat is lost and the less energy needed to heat the homes, which really translates to lower energy bills. It also means we would want to create a more comfortable internal environment, eliminate drafts, and create a more stable internal temperature. We need to really think about this holistically and need to ensure that we are, as I said before, making sure that we are not overheating the buildings, that we are making sure the internal air quality is really high. So now I think it'd be a great time to pause again. We'd love to get your feedback on what we've just shown, and please let us know your thoughts on the options presented. And again, if there's anything that we've missed, and we can go back to the previous points as well. Thank you. I'll just close this. Harriet, do you want to share the mirror board again?
And so while that's going on, some very interesting questions have come through on the chat. In no particular order, maintaining green roofs, the Sedum roofs, Daniel Chin asked, these will be low maintenance Sedum roofs if we can, provided we can check that it's all viable and safe and all those things. So there's some design development to do, but the aim is to use low maintenance Sedum roofs, which have been tried and tested in many locations. They don't need very much maintenance, very little indeed. And I think that will be part of the estate maintenance generally. Somebody asked about the white plastic facing on Cornwall Crescent. Matthew did. Can that be removed? We'll certainly look at that. Outward opening doors, I think we've just talked about a little bit. And certainly the external wall insulation will be with, we're showing at the moment only brick slip options, but I mean, we can discuss those further. So it'll be real brick, it's not fake in any way. In fact, it's possible to make the estate look almost exactly as it does now, but maybe there's an opportunity to do something different. And Matthew made a point that trees won't grow on Camelford Court in between the buildings. Point taken. We will be sure to be engaging competent landscape architects going ahead on the whole estate strategies for the landscape. Question here about coming into our homes for mechanical ventilation systems and how large the ducts are and how extensive in each room. I put in MVHR myself in my house, and it makes it take in the corner of the room. There is a little boxing out of the pipes. The pipes are about 4 inches, 100 millimeters in diameter, maybe 125 in some cases. So it's not very intrusive, but obviously there is an impact inside.
Just one point to stress in there. If we do the ductwork, we will be looking at putting it in just in passageways or in cupboards. The aim is not to lower the ceilings throughout the flat. It's just locally in, say, out of the way areas, we'll be looking at putting the ducts. So it shouldn't impact on the headroom generally.
The question here, is each flat going to have its own ventilation system? Yes, it will. Each flat has a MVHR unit that connects to the outside air. There's a question here about who pays for the energy costs of the MVHR. Overall, the energy costs are reduced through MVHR. The electricity that's required to run the MVHR is far, far less energy than conventional heating, and it pays for itself through that. Overall, the energy bill should be lower and the comfort higher in these buildings. Will you hear the MVHR? There is, if you go up the MVHR, properly it's installed. If it's properly installed, you shouldn't hear it, but there is a little bit of a hum with MVHR, especially near the outlets, but it's quite quiet. But there is undeniably, in some areas, there is a bit of a hum.
And there's a question just come in about how residents can request for their properties to be refurbished. Is that something, James, you wanted to touch on?
Sure, thanks, Leo. So the ordering of the internal property refurbishment programme has been based on the stock condition information that we've received. So the reason we started with Moorland House, for example, is we had a kitchen and a bathroom in there 46 years old. So we're moving block to block, and obviously there will be an overlap at some point with the main overall block refurbishment, and at some point it would make sense to join everything up together. But we were keen not to leave residents waiting for that. Now, that said, if for any reason you feel that you'd like a survey of your home because you feel, and you're a tenant obviously, and you feel that there's a health and safety risk, we can arrange a survey at any time to see whether there's an urgency we need to bring refurbishment forward. I can see a second question there about another lockdown. So in the borough, there was 109 capital programmes at the outset of the pandemic. During the first lockdown, which all of us will know was the most stringent lockdown, and particularly that was the one there were restrictions on building works. All but 7 capital programmes were suspended at that time. We were one of the 7 that wasn't, and therefore we have continued. However, given we've had people home working, homeschooling, all the rest of it, we've had all sorts of issues with the supply chain. So that's impacted for residents who are in Camelford Walk in terms of the new tiling that's been put in, that caused delays there. So we've done the best to keep the show on the road, if you like. But obviously, given everything that's going on at the moment, I can't make any promises whatsoever other than we will do our very best to keep things progressing, but sensitive to what residents tell us. And just on that third question about rent bills, there is absolutely no link whatsoever between the rent that we charge and the level of investment that we've secured for Lancaster West. And as Sunand has made the point there, if anything, a lot of this investment will pay for itself and substantially improve the quality of your homes and hopefully your lives as well.
Thank you, James. A few questions here about the MVHR. Firstly, it doesn't link the flats together. So the air is directly fresh air from the outside, and it's filtered to remove allergens in as a bonus. Well, that actually is a choice that people can make. They can have filters that remove the allergens, or you can have non-allergen removing filters. You can have heat pump filters or not. On the noise issue, I think ultimately what we need to do is to install a sample flat, MVHR in a sample flat, and for people to go and listen for themselves and to see what the noise is. The noise doesn't accumulate because it's actually quite local, the noise. It's not that if you have several flats, you suddenly get a roar outside in the corridors. You can't hear it from outside the flat at all, I would say. And I have lived with MVHR now for 5 years, never had disturbed sleep, but really, all the tenants really need the information themselves, and the leaseholders, and that will be done by installing a flat with MVHR, and everybody can go and listen to it and satisfy themselves about the noise levels. Question again about the maintenance of the green roof. I think, as I've said before, Sedum is a succulent. It lasts regardless of the heat. It changes color in the summer and winter, and requires very, very little maintenance. And it is not in itself a fire hazard. It never dries out to be a fire hazard, to my knowledge. But good point. I think we should definitely look at it and make sure that's true.
There are guidelines now and standards for using green roofs in London, and so one of the things you have are fire breaks. If in the eventuality that there could be a fire, the fire breaks like stones, which are spaced ½ a metre apart to keep the sedum separate. And I think the risk came up when we were talking with residents of Camelford Court. In itself, it's not going to catch fire. The risk that was raised was whether people might flick matches or cigarettes from high level onto the sedum. So we're obviously going to assess those risks and decide if it's the right place to put it. So we would be minimizing any risk for any fire taking place in the first place. And just on the maintenance, it is really just a yearly inspection, no more than that. It's just to check that nothing else has taken root in the sedum that shouldn't be there, like an oak tree. So it's just a checking procedure rather than any actual gardening needing to be done. Sorry, just handing back now to anybody else with any questions.
There's a question here about who gets the proposed, from Helen, the proposed external insulation, whichever way we decide to go forward, does the leaseholder get that too? James, I think the answer is yes.
It is absolutely, yes, and that wouldn't be rechargeable to any leaseholder either, because we would be going beyond the existing fabric of the building. Just in terms of full disclosure, the way that these things work is leaseholders, as part of their service charges, although we expect them to go down, mainly because of how inefficient the heating and hot water system is, and various other things. We've got lighting that's on 24/7, even if it's in broad daylight, and all the rest of it. But so there would be an element of maintenance within the service charges, but we think overall, in terms of the overall envelope of service charges, that should go down. At the end of the life of the external wall insulation, or when it needs repairing, more to the point, and the same with lifts, eventually they would need to be replaced, although we would hope that would be 30 years away from a new lift. At that point, that does become a rechargeable element. So I just want to be absolutely clear. But in terms of the additional, the initial cost and benefit, leaseholders would absolutely share that benefit without the cost, unless it's an existing building element.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, so what does everybody feel?
I think we can carry on with the presentation now, and we've covered most questions and comments anyway. So yeah.
I mean, there are questions here which need answering, but I think let me assure everybody that we will look at all of these very, very interesting and comprehensive comments. So I think, Annalisa, you're finishing off.
Yes, if you mind just closing your screen, Harriet, I'll just share the presentation again. Thank you. So I'll just hand over to Emily just to talk through the surveys to finish off.
All right, yeah, next steps. So the critical next steps are the surveys, because without understanding your buildings a bit more, it will be difficult for us to develop the proposals and also look at all the different areas we discussed tonight. So the first set of surveys we really need are the structural surveys, and these will help us understand the existing structure and how much of the new proposals it can support. These will involve a small section of your ceiling being opened up so that we can see the slab and how it connects back to the supporting walls. The works overall will take a few days, but anything taken down will be repaired and redecorated. And the reason we are reaching out is because there aren't any suitable void flats, and there's just no other way we can get access to check this. So without these, we won't be able to get much further. We've had 2 volunteers come forward on Camelford Court already, so that's been a great help, and it's a lot of thanks to the residents who volunteered. We still need volunteers for Upper Camelford Walk, Upper Talbot Walk, and Upper Clarendon Walk. And the reason it's the upper floors is because we need to get to the roof slab. So there will be letters sent out soon, if not already, about this. And if you need any more information before you decide if you want to volunteer, feel free to ask, but it'll be really appreciated. Next slide, please. So in addition to the structural surveys, there's also some less intrusive air tightness surveys we need to take, and this will help us understand how your homes are performing at the moment. This is essentially a test to see how drafty your home is. It won't require any opening up works. It's just going to be a setup like the image that you see. But it may be a bit of an inconvenience for you for 15 to 30 minutes. We do need quite a large sample of these tests so that we can test every type of home. So as many volunteers as possible would be really appreciated. Again, if you could keep an eye out for a letter, and if you have any questions before deciding, please feel free to ask. And then just one final heads up before I hand back to Annalisa, is just to let you know there will be quite a lot of surveys happening around site, around your buildings. They won't need access into your homes, but they might get quite close to you. But I'm sure the Lancaster West team will let you know before they happen. But just apologies for any disturbance for those. So back to you, Annalisa.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so just lastly, just to let you know that a copy of this presentation will be available to all residents, and also this meeting was recorded, so it'll be available on the W11 website. We'll also be sending residents out an initial design survey, which is a feedback form asking questions about everything you've seen tonight. And we'd love it if you could fill out that survey and return it to us if you haven't already commented tonight in the chat. We also hope to hold a pop-up event on the estate in April to actually be able to meet some of you at social distance and get your feedback in person. Any comments or thoughts on how we might be able to do that event would be extremely welcome, and any comments or thoughts on what we've shared tonight as well. If you have any questions after the event, please do contact the team on the email and phone number below, and any information will be found on the website. So lastly, just to say thank you so much for joining us tonight and for all of your really helpful comments. We will be taking them all on board. And I think, Bimi, did you just want to mention something about the resident e-newsletter?
Yes, thanks, Annalisa. I wanted to let you know about the e-newsletter we launched in October 2020 for residents of the estate. It's the best way to keep up to date with all refurbishment news on the estate. You can either scan the QR code or follow the link in the chat. And there are also posters up on all notice boards around the estate with the QR code, or you can find it on our Instagram bio at Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. When you sign up, you have the option of putting which block you live in. And this is really helpful if we move to block newsletters in the future. A recording of this meeting will be going up on our YouTube channel and also embedded in our W11 app, which you can download from the App Store on our website. If you do have any further questions about this presentation or comments or ideas, then please get in touch with the Lancaster West team. Thanks to everyone once again for joining us today, and see you soon.
Bumi, can I just pick up on one question that was asked here? Can the survey be sent electronically?
Linda, do you want to respond to that? I think we can send surveys electronically.
Yep, so the survey will be available in the next week or so. And what I will do is send it to anybody for whom I have an email. That's not many across the estate. So if you'd like to receive the survey by email, please do contact me or anybody in the team with your email address. We will add you to our database. Thanks.
Thank you. And can I say, and one last thing to say is that we're also keen to hear from people about the best way to conduct these engagements and to get your opinions, and all suggestions to do with the co-creation project are welcome.
Great. Thanks, Arnold. And thanks to everyone for joining us, and see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.